Oh my gosh, it's so exciting to be here.
It's wonderful that you're able to come and we're able to do this in person.
Oh, yes.
Hello. Hello. Ah, you can hear me now. Are you guys the first years or second years? Okay, I'm Dr. Karen Snyder. I don't see you that much. I'm the Assistant Dean for OPP Integration, and I'm the Program Chair for this year's Founders Day presentation. Every year during Founders Day, we have a lecture that is supposed to motivate you, first-year students and second-year students next door, and our CME participants over in the Blumenthal lab who come back every year to get a dose of osteopathy. As part of that motivation, that is sponsored by Fred Tinning, who passed away this past year. Fred Tinning was a president of ATSU University here, and he retired right before I got here in 1999. And he wanted to keep this presentation alive to inspire you first years and you second years next door and you CME participants over in the Blumenthal lab. And this year, I am so pleased to bring Lara Salyer here to inspire you, because she inspired me at the AAO convocation a few years ago. So she graduated from here in 2000 and then went into family practice and then experienced that thing that we call burnout. But then found her way out of that through creativity and exercise, and then began focusing her practice more on wellness instead of disease. Isn't that an interesting way of working with patients? So she is here, and we are so happy to have her here and talk about how you can integrate creativity into your lives and your practices as you work with your patients in the future. Thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Happy Founders Day. Woo! Or is it Merry Founders Day, or how do we, is it peace be with AT? What do we say? I don't know. But I am so honored to be here. This is truly a dream come true. I took a tour of the town early this morning, was happy to see that Polly Ice Pizza is still safe. There's a couple things that have changed, right? Like, you know, back in the day when I was here, the Macarena was coming around, but there's new things. I see somebody in my old apartment is a Gen Zer. They have LED lights in their room. So I'd like to talk with them because, you know, we need to have a little talk. But first, I want to say I'm dedicating this talk to the class of 2000 and to my dear friend, Dr. Lara Tinning. She is amazing, as is her family, Dr. Fred and Janet Tinning, who I knew very well. And I'm very happy to be invited back here. Founders Day is the foundation of osteopathic medicine, right? But it's the foundation of so much more. This is the foundation of friendships that you will have for the rest of your life. This is the foundation of your passion, your purpose, your mission, your career. But it's also the foundation of burnout. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, some disclosures. This is the very first lecture, hopefully the last, that I'll have to give with a KN95. So we're going to get a little different here. I love to see smiles, and since I can't see your smiles, and you can't tell that I did suffer 2.5 years of orthodontic treatments in 1987, we're going to ask you to move your body a bit. So if something resonates with you, something really hits you, make a noise. You can practice with a polite golf clap. Let's try that right now, right? You can try snapping fingers if that's more your jam. You at home can play too. You can even try hitting your thigh. Do not pinch your neighbor though, okay? I may ask you at some times to raise your hands. It does not mean I will call on you, I promise. But let's try raising our hands right now. We're just going to open up that thoracic inlet. How about both of them? Here we go. Got to get that, you know. We all been sitting all day, can stretch, right? Okay, so let's get going. More disclosures. I have no financial relationships, but I am welcoming anybody that would like to help me put my kids through college, because that would be awesome. I did publish a book. I do receive royalties for that, and I would love it if you guys picked up a copy. I talk a lot about what I experienced here in Kirksville, because as much of the foundations of medicine here, it's really the foundation of memories that you'll share. And what I noticed is, even though the town has changed, it isn't the town. It's the people. That's what we're here for. This is not me. Okay, that's the last disclosure we'll talk about. So today we're going to go through a roller coaster. This is sort of medicine meets entertainment, or medutainment, I guess. So we're going to go through a lot. So buckle up. Feel free, if you're at home, screenshot it, share it on social media, do all the things that you do, right? I'd like you first to turn to your neighbor. And I want you to ask them a question as if they were shrunk down to 5 years old. What is the question we ask all 5-year-olds? What do you want to be when you grow up, right? Right? How many of us got that right? How many of us asked, right? So, we're all here. This is what we wanted to be when we grew up, right? We wanted to be healers. We wanted to be physicians. We wanted to be osteopathic physicians and heal with our hands, right? This was my white coat ceremony in 1996 with my anatomy group. I still talk to them. Woo! Right? And there's my husband, dedicating this to him, class of 2000. He was the wisecracking Wisconsin guy behind me. Yep. And we studied a lot of anatomy, really, really, for real anatomy. For real. Dr. Towns knows we were studying. Okay, and then we ended up, ironically, settling in a town in Wisconsin that looks like Kirksville. It's got a courthouse, it's got coffee houses, it's got everything, except we're known for cheese. Lots of cheese. We even celebrate it every other year, cheese days. And that's where we torment our 3 kids on a daily basis. This is what we all go into medicine for. This is what I went into medicine for. Very Norman Rockwell. I was a rural family practice doctor, and I loved it. I loved sewing up lacerations and taking care of babies and grandmas and everybody in between. And this is what it morphed into. But it was so slow. I didn't even notice it. It felt more robotic. This is what we want to be, clicking with the patient at the bedside. But instead, we're clicking a computer mouse. This is what we're taught to measure, vital signs, right? And somehow Prescaney got on there. And sadly, in hospitals across the world, the doctors' lounges are disappearing. Last year, I'm sure you felt that with the pandemic. When you don't get to see your colleagues and your friends, it's very empty. So this is what we're signing up for. Many of us in this room are going to have burnout. It's a very sobering fact, but it's guaranteed. Because really, jobs, if they're too boring, nobody wants to be bored, right? But then if it's overwhelming, right, we want that sweet spot right in the middle. But this is the reality. This is a lot of pajama time that we didn't sign up for. We didn't know that we'd be spending hours charting after we're done. Our expectations and reality do not match. So what's the difference? Let's talk about that. Because standing here, sitting here, 51% of us are going to be burned out. So that means you're sitting next to people if it's not you. So what's the difference? Stress. Stress is very easy to treat. You're just overengaged. You're hyperactive. It's like the difference between a party and pajamas, okay? A little bit of spa time, vacation time makes you feel better. That's stress. Burnout is different. You're disengaged. You're emotionally blunted. You feel almost detached. Almost like you put your foot off of that accelerator or clutch and you're just cruising and you have no idea. You don't really care anymore. And that's when you want to answer emails with a crayon and just be like, okay. You know? So now that we have a diagnosis, it's easy to treat, right? Now in my area in Wisconsin, it's other contact with a cow is a common thing we might see or stress, but now we have burnout. Z is 73.0. So it's almost like Santa Claus does exist. Now that there's a name, now we can tackle it. And burnout is just three things. It is depersonalization, emotional exhaustion, and low perceived personal achievement. Okay? The funny thing about burnout is it's a characteristic brain pattern. So if we were to put all of our brains in a functional MRI, it would look exactly like the brain pattern of grief. So over half of our healthcare workers are going to work in a despondent, grief-stricken state. And I don't know about you, but if I took my car to a mechanic and that person just lost their spouse or their partner, I think they might miss a few things on the checkup. So we're seeing burnout seep earlier and earlier, not just attending physicians or residents, but even in medical school. And at the latest report, it was mostly tasks and paperwork was the highest reason, the busy work that we don't like doing. Turn to your neighbor. Do you agree? Do you think busy work would make you burned out? What would make you tired? Yes or no? Turn to your neighbor and ask, what makes you burned out or frustrated? Okay. All right. How many of us, raise your hands, you hate busy work? It's the paperwork. I know you're only first years, you got to study. But how many of us feel burned out when you've had less sleep? Anybody have less sleep? Right. Get the munchies, not feeling good. How many of you love to go to the TCC and exercise out some of that anxiety? Anybody go to TCC? I love TCC. Excellent, good. Right? Okay, so remember how I said 51%? It's actually 71, and 91% are feeling it after COVID. The pandemic has really made it harder for us. So what's the big deal? So what? We're burned out. We know it's going to be hard. We signed up for this, right? We're gritty. You guys are smart. You guys are savvy. You know this is going to be hard, but what's the big deal? So we have some burnout. Well, the deal is we have more medical errors. We have more healthcare costs, more medical claims. We have worse patient outcomes, and we're estimating a shortage of physicians. And we have substance abuse, divorce, and suicide. And this is not fair. We signed up to be great healers. We didn't sign up for this. And it costs $630,000 to replace one primary care physician if you talk about recruitment, interviewing, and the guarantee. So it's expensive. So when I talk to industries and hospitals and CEOs, this is the number that gets their attention. So what are the solutions that we have for resiliency, right? So we have like, let's rub some lavender on it, right? That'll help. You know, maybe get some meditation or yoga, maybe go to Tunes. You guys don't have Tunes. Tunes is no longer here. That's where we went dancing. Is there an alternative? Is there any dancing around here? Nice. Okay. All right. Or if you're lucky and you have a great residency director, maybe they might hire some weird kooky person and you get stuck in these like team building things sometimes for resiliency. They don't really work either. A lot of it is just Band-Aids. You know, it puts the blame on the physician that they need to be taking care of something, and it's really a system-wide issue that we're all trying to help. So the American Medical Association does have a great calculator, and it's very accurate. I use this when I go speak. You can plug in the number of physicians in an organization. It will take the current burnout rate, and it will calculate the cost to that institution. Mayo Clinic has an even better thing that you all can use. An individual or an organization can buy a license. And what it does is it can measure how you're feeling in burnout, how you're feeling with your purpose, your mission, your happiness. And then it can hook you into services, both locally and globally. So everyone's aware of this, and we're all trying. And the major reason people are burned out is we feel this loss of control. Right now, your first years, second years in the other room, many years of you at home. And when we start feeling that we lose that sense of control over our schedules or our rotations where we want to go, it's really hard. It makes us feel like little toddlers inside, right? You want to have control over your life. And the biggest lesson we all had for lack of control was COVID. How many of you felt really out of control in COVID? Like you had no idea what was going to happen the next day, right? And so the pandemic is making a lot of the workers feel burned out, not just physicians. 45% of us are burned out during the COVID pandemic. Of course, if you're a parent, those are your working hours. If you're a student, that's when you could study. Or if you were a resident, your rotation, you had no idea if you're going to get pulled to help in the ER. It's very fragmented. Now we're used to it, right? So we're going on, used to burnout, it's fine. 71% of us sitting on the bench. So let's talk about how stress affects our body. This is a fun roller coaster ride here. We're going to talk about what happens in our body with stress. So 1 in 5 of us will have a physical reaction thinking about the pandemic, a physical gut reaction. And that's because burnout is emotional trauma that impacts our physiology. This is where we get to cross osteopathic principles, right? You learn to heal with your hands. You learn about cranial. You learn about energy. You learn about how you can affect the energy of another physiologic human being the same way that thoughts and emotions can affect yours. So all of these things are speaking right to your cells right now. And it's sort of like when you try to make dopamine, you're not good at it, you're so burned out, right? So we need to help ourselves get better. And it's all about the limbic system. Have you guys taken neuroanatomy yet? No? Okay, so we'll do a little buffet tour. Okay, limbic system. Right now, you're using your prefrontal cortex. That's the one that's analyzing, listening, you're understanding, and it's going to file some things away in your hippocampus. All day long, these things talk to each other. All day long, you're retrieving memories. But ironically, or not so ironically, you also have the amygdala, which is like your fear emotional center of the brain. When that's triggered, it's going to stop or prevent a lot of communication. So you're not going to remember things. So kids that are in houses that might be loud and violent, that's why they don't do well on cognitive testing. You also have a hypothalamus. When that's engaged, it's like your EMS system. So it'll start making your pulse raise. It'll start making your palms sweat. It'll make your breathing more shallow because it's trying to keep you alive. The limbic system is that primitive reptilian system that we all have. And so what it does is it can make a difference in what you're feeling from anything you're seeing. So your amygdala, every one of you in here has a completely different reaction to things around you. For example, seeing this vision of train tracks for you might make you remember awesome walks with your grandfather, picking dandelions, and the summer breeze is on your skin, and you're feeling safe and it's really fun. But maybe to you, seeing these train tracks, you think of poverty, drugs, and you're scared. It's not the stimulus, it's your response to the stimulus. So we all have this different response system going on in our bodies. And we can prove it right now. I can show you one image that 5 years ago, you never probably even had a response. It was a neutral image. But now, if you found this in your coat pocket, it's like so different, right? Like in 10 years, when you have an old winter jacket and you find your very first mask, oh, my very first COVID mask. Some memories, right? So our limbic system is keeping us alive. Our brain only wants two things: to avoid pain and to seek out pleasure. But unfortunately, the avoid pain part is stronger. Your brain is literally changing when you're stressed. When that little amygdala is going, maybe you're walking down a certain hallway here that you remember studying biochem, and it's getting you a little nauseated. So then you start studying somewhere else, right? Because your limbic system is keeping you alive. When you have that engaged, you start having a weaker correlation in your brain, and you're unable to control negative emotions. So you kind of end up being a little kind of a growly bear. We saw this in the ACE study where they watched 12 to 15,000 kid lives through 20 years. And they saw that kids that grew up in homes that were with neglect or emotional or physical abuse ended up having more chronic disease when they were older. We also saw this in physician training. We saw that in 1 year of our training, we age 6 years. So internship is coming up in 3 years for you guys, in 2 years for your second years. And your telomeres are shrinking. Telomeres are like the little plastic end caps on your shoelaces, and all they're supposed to do is protect the DNA inside. But when you have a lot of stress and cortisol, they shrink. So we age faster than our counterparts. It's because of our mitochondria, right? The powerhouse of our cells. Mitochondria take the fats, carbs, and proteins, mix it with oxygen, make some ATP. It's, it's like what makes it rain in our body. It's the currency. But they're also like emo teens. Mitochondria are a bit finicky, okay? So at a 10,000-foot view, your mitochondria need certain things to work. They mostly live in your brain and your muscle, but when they're stressed, they don't want to give hugs, just like teens. They're right here, okay? Good mitochondria in a healthy environment, without that amygdala firing, without all that stress, they actually don't mind giving hugs. They do their job. They make the energy. They even fight intruders. But when you're stressed, they start to shrink. And they go to their rooms. They slam their doors. They play their rock-hard inflammatory music, which is basically cytokines that they put into the environment. It's like chemotaxis, right? They're surveying their environment, and they're making it inhospitable. So your mitochondria are just trying to keep you alive, but as a result, you're feeling not so good. And that communication goes from your gut to your brain, because you're all one whole person, right? This is way beyond, this is very meta, osteopathic. You're all communicating through that vagus nerve. So what we see with stress is something called intestinal permeability. Your gut is leaky, not to the point you have to count toilets, not that kind of leaky. We're talking at a microscopic level. Your intestinal barrier becomes a little more not so tight. Your tight junctions are letting things in. You end up having this metabolic endotoxinemia, which is like a fever, but you feel fine. But inside your body is not feeling good. Everything's reacting. You're getting low levels of antibodies being reacted. You're getting IL-6, if you've done immunology yet, you'll get there. Lots of leaky gut has been seen in irritable bowel, but we also see it in conditions like fibromyalgia and pain. We see it in Parkinson's disease, where we find interesting colonies of bacteria in the brains of Parkinson's patients on autopsy that have been translocated from the gut, because it is one path. We also see it in heart disease and obviously PTSD and trauma. So all of us have intestinal permeability. going on and off throughout our life. Babies are born with intestinal permeability, which is why we don't give them peanut butter sandwiches, or else they'd have allergies. It's like at the airport. It's supposed to keep all the bad things out, letting things in a sequential way, but suddenly now shampoo bottles are suspicious, and certain tennis shoes don't look safe. And we start having molecular mimicry. So autoimmune diseases, Hashimoto's, lupus, some of these diseases now, we're thinking can also be sparked by chronic stress that impact our gut. It's kind of like the monarch or viceroy, right? One was evolved so that the predator would not recognize them. And so the viceroy has a little line across the bottom, so he looks just like the monarch. Well, your body does the same thing. When you're stressed and you have that leaky gut, now suddenly, man, that beer from Wooden Nickel isn't sitting quite right anymore, right? Or that piece of bread that I ate, or that slice of pizza at Polly Eyes, that's perfection. But anyway, so you might think you're fine, but what's your real feel? How are you really feeling? How many are from the Midwest, like Wisconsin, Illinois, Missouri? Well, hey, oh God. So you can never trust the weather, right? Right? You look at the weather and it says it'll be 70 degrees, but what's the real feel? That's what I trust. And the real feel is like 200 degrees, right? Or in Wisconsin, it'll be 3 degrees, but the real feel is like negative 90. So, you have to look at the real feel. Sometimes you need a pattern interrupt to really stop and go, how do I really feel? Not this severe, I'm not recommending this one. And as a family practice doctor, if that happened, I was in the wrong room. So nonetheless, my pattern interrupt came in 2016. So class of 2000, loved Kirksville. Very much DO. I wanted to be a family practice doctor. Practiced with my husband. We were in the military. He was in the military. I was in a civilian place. Loved it. Moved to Wisconsin. Loved it. But slowly, as the years went by, I wasn't feeling quite right. I didn't know what was going on until my nurse dropped an obituary on the corner of my desk. And I've been practicing for 15 years. This is not uncommon. As a family practice doctor, you have birth, you have death. I had 1,900 patients I was taking care of, so every week you might lose one. And in Wisconsin, they grow old. There's a lot of Swiss. They live to like 200 years old. So I mean, so this one in particular was not unexpected. She was a really sweet old lady who had been suffering cancer for 3 years. In fact, her family was well supporting of her, and this is more of a relief. She wasn't in pain anymore. So normally, when I would get those little obituaries on the corner of my desk, my nurse was so good, she'd clip them out and show me. And normally, that would just spark me to open my desk drawer and pen a little note to her family and say, thank you so much for letting me be part of her care team. I loved seeing pictures of her grandkids, or I loved to see her knitting projects. And I'm glad that she's at peace now. This was my pattern interrupt, though, because I didn't open up my desk drawer. Instead, my nurse walked out, and I literally felt like celebrating. One less refill, one less nursing order, one less patient to squeeze in. I felt like jumping up and down, and then I immediately felt shameful, because that's not the kind of doctor I wanted to be. And I didn't know what to do. So at that moment, that was my pattern interrupt, to start unpacking what that meant for me. So I started drawing, I started running, I started doing some of these things, and I was finding myself in what we call flow state, which we'll talk about in a second, which unlocks so much power that I was able to trace my way back to healing again, which for my case resulted in opening up a private practice. But it's different for everybody. COVID gave us an opportunity to pause, to reflect, where are our core values, what do we want to do? And sometimes you must have some chaos before you give birth to a dancing star. So let's talk about how you are all creative geniuses absolutely right now. I'm about to ask all of you to do something that you were warned never to do, and you may have gotten in trouble from doing this when you were little. But for the next 30 seconds only, I'm going to have you close your eyes if you're comfortable and just let your mind wander, and we'll circle back in 30 seconds. We'll start now. Okay. How many, by a show of hands, how many of you had your imagination wander outside the four walls of this room? Excellent. How many of you had your imagination do things that were physically impossible, like fly with the birds or swim with the fishes? Anybody do anything like that? Cool. Excellent. How many of you just were productive? Like, okay, I've got to go get milk at Hy-Vee. I got you, girl. I know. I know, you can't turn it off. I know. But I promise you, 24/7, you have an undercurrent of alpha brain waves. This is the default network. This is in your brain. You are creative. We don't need anything crazy or abstract to be creative. In fact, creativity is anything novel and meaningful. It's basically anything you do in your own signature way. How you dress, the words you string together in a sentence, how you walk, your thoughts. It could be what Carl Jung says is the newness in the individual psyche is just endlessly varied recombination of age-old components. So it's nothing that original. This is what people think. Creativity has to be something grandiose, completely out there. No, it's just taking what's already there and putting it in your own way. T.S. Eliot, right? He said, a good poet will borrow from authors remote in time, right? We've all heard a good cover band. I mean, maybe not in Kirksville, but they're out there, right? So you don't have to be Michelangelo to be creative. In fact, osteopathic medicine is the epitome of creativity. We are blending science and art and healing. This is why you're here. It can be as simple as paper folded up in a swan, right? That's creative, something new and meaningful. In COVID, we got real creative, right? There is a limit to creativity, and I'll give you a bonus point. Anybody who knows who this is, and I don't think anybody would. Oh yes, we know. Very good. Okay, some Gen Xers in the house. This is Milli Vanilli. They basically lip-synced everything they did, and they're not really creative. So to be fully creative, to be fully alive, is using all five senses, and every single career has that opportunity. I remember the very first time I was going to change someone's life forever with plastic surgery. I remember my hands posed above the body. I remember how sweaty they felt. I remember the texture of the scratchy uniform. I remember the taste of the ham and cheese sandwich still in my mouth from lunch. And I remember the music playing in the OR. It was We Are the World, because it was 1985, and I was 9 years old. And I was going to change my brother's nose with silly putty. But I lost the patient. He ran off the table and ran through my grandfather's funeral home, because I grew up around a funeral home, which is basically gives a lot of explanation for my stories. My friends had Barbies with dream houses. Mine had mini funerals. So. But see, this proves that kids are creative. If you go to a room full of kindergartners and you ask how many of you are artists, 100% would raise their hands. They don't define themselves. That's their love language. Fast forward to 5th grade, and we might get like 30%. Then high school, it's less and less, and you get the idea. Till now, we think that's only for those that are lucky, only for those that are talented. But I can prove that every recess across the nation, if you were to take a peek, kids understand flow state more than we do. Because if they're allowed to pick teams, first of all, they would never pick me, because I'm not good at basketball. But they would pick kids that would most likely leverage them to experience that neurological flow state of oneness, of feeling fully alive, because group flow is just as powerful as individual flow. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about flow. We've talked about burnout is grief, right? We've talked about it's the same thing as grief. It is emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, low perceived achievement. It's not a fun state to stay in, even as a granddaughter of a mortician. I mean, I love Halloween, but we don't want this all the time. What we want is engagement, right? We want to feel emotional energy, resiliency, a sense of significance, enthusiasm, right? Deeply engrossed and very selfless, like your ego dissolves. And that's the same thing as flow state. Flow state was discovered or named by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who is a Turkish-American psychologist, and he researches this. In fact, I'm in the Flow Research Collective mastermind of training where I can now help coach people to leverage flow state, to find their flow blockers and get rid of them, and to add more flow triggers. And that's my mission for medical schools, is to help coach us so that we can keep that alive. Flow state, we feel selfless. Time dissolves. We feel effortless, and everything's rich, right? So it's sort of like going into school. You couldn't hear your teacher saying it's time to come in because your hands were full of greasy finger paint. Or when you're standing at that three-point line, which I don't even know what that is, but I heard that's a sports term. I'm not an athlete. And you're trying to get that basketball into the hoop, right? That's flow. And when we're in flow, this is the cool part. 100% more meaning in what you're doing, 200% more learning, 430 innovation, and 500 productivity. So those kids that are doing their basketball and they're playing, they know that when they go back to class, they're going to learn a lot better. They're going to retain that knowledge. That is a superpower. And kids have that, and we've kind of forgotten that. But we all live on this hero's journey. We've heard of this famous trope of a lot of stories. You encounter some struggles, you learn something, you have a death and rebirth, and you bring it back to the tribe. That's what medical school is, right? This is hard. But there's a worthwhile end. We have many hero journeys every day, right? But this is a superpower of flow, and it actually has a similar cycle. Neurologically, you have a struggle phase. And this is what people don't realize. You're right at the beginning of flow. They give up there. That's where people give up, is right at the top. Oh, this is too hard. But that's important, because once you move past that to the release, which is that nitric oxide in the brain, the aha moment, that you go, wait a second, this is really amazing. And then you go into flow state, and you have a fourth recovery cycle, which is a completely different pattern. And you can find flow in every occupation, but how do we get there? There's actually a recipe. And everyday creative activity is what is the key to helping us get there. It has a positive effect long after that creative activity. You can do 30 seconds of doodling and coloring, and it will have a benefit. In fact, when you put our brains in functional MRIs, we see that we have increased blood flow to the reward center of our cortex. Our brains love doodling. You don't have to be good. It helps us regulate our mental states. We control stress. It helps us relax. And we fail safely, and we can handle our emotions. In neurosurgery, they trained surgeons to move their sweat spot to a sweet spot by augmenting flow. And they found their complex tasks felt very effortless, and they were less likely to make errors. So what if I told you we can make this happen? We can. So now let's talk in this last moment of how we're going to give you that recipe. It's a small taste of the recipe. It's a creative brain activation pattern, and it can be amplified with just a little bit of effort and practice. The problem is, we think we need like a cabin in the woods to write our novel, or we need to go on a big trek along the Appalachians to find a canvas and paint our masterpiece, and that is not true. You need method. You actually need strategic rhythm. Well, you kind of preserve routine when working from home, and that gives us structure. Humans like structure, right? So creative minds think like artists, but we work like accountants, believe it or not. Creative people are very regimented. Georgia O'Keeffe, all the greatest writers would get up early and have their flow, and they knew how to have a cadence throughout their day. And that's another thing I want to encourage residencies and medical students everywhere to start looking at your own flow. When are your best hours? Are you a night owl? Are you an early bird? Start to maximize some of this and try and mold your life around that. So this recipe is the MIND recipe, M-I-N-D, and we bring back our teen emo mitochondria. We integrate our brains, left and right hemispheres, across the corpus callosum. You haven't had neuroanatomy yet. Notice and divergent. So let's talk about that. You do have a copy of this I have extras, and you also get a digital copy. It's a little reminder of how you can start using this creativity. So first, the mitochondria, right? It's scary. The Krebs cycle is scary. But if we simplify it, it's actually not that hard, right? Mitochondria have a pause and a play button. People don't realize. The pause activates something called TNF-alpha and NF-kappa B. These are things that really downgrade our ATP so we feel sluggish. Our mitochondria are just like those emo teens not picking up a dirty sock. They're not doing anything. And so when you have a lot of these in your life, your mitochondria are going to be a lot less efficient. So if you use a tanning bed, if you cook with Teflon, if you live by a farm that's sprayed all the time with pesticides, if your sugars are not controlled, like you're pre-diabetic, if you eat a lot of fast foods, all those things are making your mitochondria sick. But the good news is their play button is way easier to activate. And this helps by activating NRF2. So if you eat a lot of leafy greens, if you drink a lot of green tea, if you control your sugars, and if you do a lot of healthy things, you can make more ATP. Plants are medicinal. Phytonutrients, flavonoids, they actually bind to anti-anxiety receptors in the brain. They make you feel good. So when we cope years ago, we might cope by smoking away our anxiety, right? Or Butasol. But now what do? We cope by running and getting a sticky bun or grabbing a thing of Doritos, right? Carbohydrates make us more anxious and depressed. It actually makes it worse. So if you consume vegetables, you actually feel better. So I'm suggesting maybe skipping the sugary drinks next time when you're trying to cram for that test. Maybe putting some mitochondria-rich stuff on your plate, like salads, just a little bit. You don't have to be perfect, but it does help. So let's talk about integrating. Bonus question. Anybody know the name of the man who unfortunately had his severed brain hemispheres from a tamping iron accident while working on the railroad? Somebody said it. Phineas Gage. Very good. Smarty pants. So we used to think that the right side was only creative, the left side logical. You actually need both to communicate, and that's what integrate is about. We want to enhance that neuroplasticity. So old science says that the brain is done growing at age 25. Someone said that. That's why I tell my kids you cannot vote or have a child or drive a car till you're 25. I know, they don't listen. Nonetheless, but neuroplasticity is the connections, the highways of thoughts, and that goes on lifelong if you nourish it. Okay? So that's why if our brains feel like we're done at 25, but yet we have more connections, you can look in the mirror when you're, say, 46, and you look like you're 25, because your brain thinks you're 25, but reality is quite different. Okay? So we need to knit those neuroplastic connections. You spend all day in your beta, all day. That's what you're doing. Studying, thinking, arranging, planning, scheduling. I want everyone to start thinking about that alpha in the back, which is that beautiful creative brainwaves that are just sitting in the back burner. They're working right now. They're taking in the words, and they're probably taking in the seat you're sitting in and feeling the air on your skin and wondering what you're going to have for dinner. The alpha brainwaves is what reduces depression, and it happens when sensory input is minimized. When I asked you to close your eyes earlier today, it like wakes up your alpha brainwaves, turns them on instantly. When your mind is clear of unwanted thoughts, they turn on. When you feel relaxed, wakeful, right? So there's opportunities that we all have to engage in that release, that alpha brainwave. It's what happens right now. You might be seeing all the colors on my screen, and you might have heard some conversation maybe out in the back if you're sitting in the back. And maybe you saw the image of a sticky bun. So then when you get up and you walk over and you go wash your hands, you integrate. The alpha brainwaves come on, and you remember, oh, I have to order those cupcakes, because you remembered color, sweet, people talking about it. That's how your brain works. It's working for you all the time. We do this every day, hopefully, unless you're a teen. But we do this every day, and that is why 72% of people have creative insight in the showers, because sensory input is minimized. You're just sort of on autopilot. You're clear of unwanted thoughts, and your alpha brain waves are at their best. So keep like a dry erase board by the shower. You'll never believe what your brain will come up with. But let's say you don't have time. Let's say in the middle of the day, you're like, I don't know what to do. I'm feeling just so burned out, so tired, and I really want to work on some creativity. No time for a shower? Then what we can do is use something to help increase your BDNF, which is your brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And you simply have to do some bilateral exercise. That's it. Take a walk, run, knit, drum. Anything bilateral will help increase those connections. BDNF is like an orchestra. It needs this pause and play. So the more you do some of this, you can create more creativity. And you can do this by also fasting. Anybody heard of intermittent fasting? Yeah. Anybody tried it? Cool. Awesome. It's great. It's just a method of turning on and off your genes. In fact, right here is evidence of on and off genes when you're intermittent fasting. It's like the minute you stop eating, your body goes into fix it and clean it mode, like having your mother-in-law come and dust off everything in your house. It just goes into clean it mode, and that's really helpful. But when we snack all day long, or if you're a medical student or resident and you're up all night and you're eating all night, you're not giving your body that chance to just do some of that maintenance housekeeping. But when we fast, which is defined as anything 12 hours or more, and when we fast only 5 out of 7 days, you don't have to be perfect. That's the cool part. There's no perfectionism here in our body. Increased energy, anti-inflammatory. Your mitochondria perk up because they're given time to rest. They're able to do other things. So to integrate your brain, stop doom scrolling when you're stressed and just go for a walk. Just go out, take a look. So MIN, N is notice, okay? It's the third part of the recipe. Creativity is connecting the dots in a way that they were never connected before. Mathematician Henri Poincaré used to go to coffee houses for a mathematician, because he found that ideas arose in the randomness of strangers' conversations, and he could connect patterns. Art courses help us notice as medical students. We have better observational skills, right? As DOs, you're never going to watch someone walk down the street the same again. Never, right? You're going to go, that's a pseudospasm. Oh, that's piriformis. You know, you're totally going to know, look at their shoes. They're worn differently. I mean, you observe the human body more than you ever will. This is why my daughter, she connected the dots. She noticed. Based on one thing, she said, Mom, I've ruled out 5 careers already. And I said, what? Why? How do you know? Oh, based on one common thing. I hate puke that much. There we go. No carnival working for her. One other way that you right now can start practicing that convergent creative thought, the convergence of noticing, is gratitude. UC Davis ran a lot of great studies that showed gratitude is purely good medicine. 28% reduction in stress, 7% reduction in inflammatory cytokines, which is really helpful in COVID. And you get a positive feedback loop by dopamine. So it feels good. Gratitude is good. You notice one tiny gratitude thing per day, it exercises that gratitude neuroplastic connection. So stop complaining. I know, there's a lot to complain about, and it's okay. But do it very sparingly, because it really does make it worse. We get good at what we do, right? That neuroplastic connection gets real good the more you complain. So start doing a gratitude journal, and you might be surprised. Last, divergent, right? This is where we think all the creativity is, right? The abstract, bizarre thoughts. But really, a great idea is just a combination of many good ones. In COVID, we had lots of opportunity to think differently, right? We wondered, really, who's behind all of this? And we got to distribute Halloween candy down tubes, and then swimwear, totally different. So divergent creativity is something that is welcomed in a pandemic. We just need permission sometimes to play with our brain. Now, there's an app for everything, right? The one app that gives you permission is Pinterest. Okay? It gives you permission to do all sorts of things, right? It gives you permission to just try and fail with laughter, you know? So when we have medical students do creativity, they start to have failures but prepare with resiliency because those skills are translational. You can have fun and laugh and actually be a better doctor just by exercising your creativity. And this is what I do when I give small groups or work with large institutions. I take a playbook from the Torrance creativity test and I have them do a doodle. And you'd be surprised how many brilliant things can happen. In fact, there's always one person in the group that always has their hands crossed. They don't want to play my games, right? We all know. You all know. There's probably people here. And if it's not somebody, it's probably you, right? And those people are like, yeah, I don't want to draw. And I'm like, just humor us. We're going to do for 10 minutes. And by the end, it's always that person that wants that purple marker. They're always like, where's that marker? Because they get into it, right? It's like we're all kindergartners at heart. So we end up coloring. And it's beautiful to see what you can do when you just play. You can take a simple squiggle and look at like a hip-hop queen, right? Princess Amygdala. I use this in my patient practice. Every patient that walks into my consulting practice, now I am a functional medicine doctor, so I went into private practice. And I work with patients, I teach them about their biochemistry, and I get them better. It's graduation. It's like a graduation process. But we start by asking a tough question, which I would love for all of you to remember the miracle question. If a miracle happened overnight, how would your life look differently after working with me? After I laid my hands on your skull and did some cranial, what would that look like? Would you wake up and have no headaches? Would you be able to have your whole day without that latte at 3 p.m. because you're tired? And so I asked them, I want you to draw for me. Every patient comes in with their sheet. I ask them for where their homework is. And they come in and they say, well, my art isn't good. No, there's no such thing as bad art. I just want to see what you put on that paper. When they put things on paper, it's a chance for them to be a kid, yes. It's a chance for them to actually draw, yes. But what I'm doing is a psychological and neurological trick. I'm having them make choices about what they want their future to look like. And then also, I have them keep it and put it on their fridge, because now every little micro decision they make, they have to kind of check in with themselves. Is it aligning with that mission? Are they eating Big Macs and hoping to lose weight? You know, that kind of thing, right? So don't settle for that status quo. Check your routine. See what you can do different. Walk home in a different way. Listen to a different radio station. Take something that's mundane and boring and make it fun. I do this with Moober duty. It's mom and Uber. So every day I had to take my kids around to their activities, and I would tell them, you know, today there's a price surge. Okay? So you have to tell me 2 things that happened that I don't know about you. What happened in your day, right? Just be fun, be creative. We've had this whole time to talk about the beauty that is in your skull of creativity. You'll have access to the mind recipe. And if you really do want more, I would love to talk with any of you, even as you venture out. My husband is the residency director at Monroe Clinic. We have great family practice residencies. I'm sure I'll see some of you in conferences. But I love getting people up and moving. I love doing improv and art and drawing. And if you would like, you could read the book. Yes, I do talk about funeral home experience. I do talk about Kirksville. You'll laugh, you'll cry, it'll be great. But in closing, this is the important part here. As you venture out, you're going to get a lot of well-meaning resiliency lectures. It is not about wearing more armor. It's not about making yourself grittier. It's not about putting on a tough skin. And let me tell you, there's going to be some attendings that are going to ride your hide when you're over there, right? It's not about that. The world is very uncertain. It's very toxic. We cannot change that. It won't change overnight. Our system is broken for healthcare. I wish it was better. We're working on it. But what we can do is we can keep ourselves sparkly inside. Continue to be curious about what you have. Know that creativity is not elusive, that is very powerful and very useful. Creativity is accessible and it is very necessary as you move forward as doctors. And know that the artist is alive in any person and opens ways for better understanding, showing there's more pages possible. So one final thought experiment. What are these? Vitals, right? They measure hearts, blood pressure, pulse, respiratory rate, right? Vital signs are called vital because they keep you alive. Makes sense. It's pretty good branding right there. So I'm old enough to remember the day when we had a fifth vital sign. Does anybody know what the fifth vital sign is? Pain. So that was confusing because that's not objective. It's very subjective, but we're asking every office visit, so do you have pain? Where is it? On a scale of 1 to 10. Now, as DOs, we're great at helping pain, but like every office visit, we're reminding patients how painful life is. And I would like to say, as an amateur armchair Buddhist, I think life is painful. I think putting that expectation 20 years ago has set up this uncomfortable dynamic between physician and patient that has disempowered the patient and put way too much responsibility on the physician to treat, correct, and fix pain. And now we're surprised we have opioid overdoses. And now we're surprised that we have this horrible problem in the United States where we're addicted, right? We have more suicide because we're thinking that life should not be painful. It is. And unfortunately, sometimes the doctor is not the one to fix the pain. So my suggestion, my thought experiment, what would happen if we added a sixth vital sign? What would happen if instead of concentrating on the negativity, at every visit, we just asked them simply, when was the last time you played? When was the last time you picked up your hobby? What brings you joy? And we plant those seeds of positivity. And what if, instead of 20 years from then, 20 years from now, we have a renaissance of healers, of empowered patients who understand how to take inventory and stock of their own creativity and the power that lies within. Thank you for helping me on my mission to transform 1 million health professionals, teaching them about creativity so they can increase their autonomy and avoid burnout. And it's been a pleasure to color outside the lines with you. And I hope that you take from this that ability to be curious and playful. And I wish you well on your medical careers. Thank you so much.
And now you know why I brought her here for you guys to hear. Because this was just such a fantastic presentation. By the way, I made oatmeal chocolate chip cookie bars off of Pinterest yesterday. It's wonderful. You don't always fail, but it's always fun. Thank you so much. Dr. Wilson has a plaque for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Am I staying or going?
And hopefully you can take some of this information with you as you go out onto your rotations and you go out into residency. And if you're in internship, and like so many of the residents now that are in the hospital right now with all the COVID patients, take a few minutes just to be creative during your day, or make some oatmeal cookie bars when you get home.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Salyer. We're so proud to have you back here. You know, we're so proud of our graduates, and it's just so much fun to have you back on campus and to listen to you, and we really appreciate what you have to share with our students and with our faculty and all of us. And I just want to tell all of you, happy Founders Day. Tomorrow's going to be a fun, exciting day. You'll have lots of activities going on campus, and we're so happy for you to be able to enjoy those this year. So just, again, remember who we are, kind of remember our roots, where we came from as we go into this Founders Day celebration. And we have a lot to be proud of as the osteopathic profession, and you are our future, so we're so proud of you. So have a great rest of the week and celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. Thank you.